Adelaide absolutely slaughtered a terrible Port Adelaide last week in the showdown, who couldn't fire at any point and were ravaged with injuries to key players like Hartlett, Schultz and White. Daniel Talia has another opportunity to bathe a star key forward this week when we face Jack Riewoldt and Richmond at Etihad Stadium on Saturday afternoon. The first bounce is at 2:10pm local time or 1:40pm Adelaide time, in what the odds suggest could be a very close encounter. I'm your host Scorpus, and this is the Crowcast Preview. Alright, with me tonight on the cast are once again the same guys from last week, same high quality members. We've got Mr. Mystery Guest and Hank. How are you guys doing tonight?
Good to be back on.
Good, thanks, Scorpus.
Alright, cool. So, of course, we're playing Richmond this week, and we'll just go through the teams briefly, as always. So, we're actually unchanged this week, which is pleasing after we destroyed Port Adelaide. And Richmond, on the other hand, they've actually made 4 changes. So, coming in, Troy Chaplin, Shane Edwards, Ben Lennon, and Daniel Rioli. And coming out, Ben Griffiths, Dylan Grimes, who's out with a hamstring injury, Taylor Hunt and Jacob Townsend. They also don't have in their team Maric, Deledio and Yaron yet, so those are all pretty notable omissions for them, or at least they haven't played this year. Of course, the last match that we played was round 19, 2015. It was the night game at Adelaide Oval. We won by 36 points with a huge 33 scoring shots to 12. We were down by just 1 point at quarter time, but we ground out a victory despite being hugely inaccurate on the night. Walker towed up Alex Rance with 2 goals, 5 and 10 marks. Betts also had 2 goals, 3. Tomo was the leading possession getter with 30, and we had 3 goals to Dustin Martin from the opposition. So, Hank, what do you think of the unchanged team?
I think most people you couldn't really drop anyone from last week based on the performance. It would have been pretty harsh to cut someone from such a dominating performance, especially also with the fact that the SANFL team was obviously solid, but no one really had a performance to really put their name on the board to get upgraded. So, no, I think, once again, the masses sometimes complain about changes, but so far I think most of the fans have been pretty spot on with our thoughts, and then the coaches have backed that up as well. Last week we were calling for Hardingen to come in, and that happened, and then this week we were calling for a unchanged lineup, and once again we get that as well. So, no, pretty happy, I would say. Yeah,
I agree with you about the SANFL changes. I guess we're kind of a bit lackluster. We lost at 3/4 time and then managed to pile on a couple of junk time goals, I guess, at the end. Not that I caught any of the game living in Victoria, unfortunately. But so our emergencies for this game are actually VB, along with Lions and Knight. Mr. Mystery Guest, who do you think is the most unlucky player not to be able to push into the team?
Oh, probably Knight. I think I didn't watch all of the game, but I did watch most of the SANFL game. I thought Knight was one of the best for the majority. I actually did think that Van Burley did some nice things, but I'm not sure if he'll ever get back into the AFL side, though.
Yeah, there's certainly some people who don't want him back.
Yeah, I think he's probably too good for SANFL, but I think when he was out for a year, I think the game officially might have gone past him.
Yeah, I definitely agree. He's just slightly too cooked, I think, for AFL at the moment. And so one of our other, I guess, whipping boys, David McKay, was quite good against Port Adelaide, and I think he's actually slipped away from the chopping block for now. Do you think that McKay will be able to back up his performance from last week?
Yeah, I think so. He's always had the weapons to be able to put up that performance. The problem with McKay is it's always been one good game and then 6 or 7 so-so performances. So hopefully, maybe, and also last week was such a dominating performance. It'll be interesting to see how he would perform in maybe a tighter game or against a team that puts up a bit more resistance. So, but I think he's got a good enough game to perform well. So whether he can back that up is a better question. Hopefully, we'll see it again next week as well, or this week.
Well, if we can start destroying Richmond like we did to Port Adelaide last week, I think we might be in with a chance to see another good game from McKay. Switching a little bit over to what Richmond has done with their changes, they've actually brought in quite a lot of smaller players. They omitted Ben Griffiths, which is one of their big talls, and also a guy who can play in the ruck. And they've brought in Shane Edwards, Ben Lennon, and Daniel Rioli, 3 players who could rotate through the forward line, all of them pretty short. They also have their new guy, Short, down there, who's just 177 centimetres, along with Lloyd, and, Dustin Martin will be rotating through there as well. I think they're definitely setting up for, trying to counter our 3 or 4 talls that we'll have down there in the defensive 50. How do you see that playing out, Mr. Mystery Guest?
Yeah, I agree. It definitely seems like a deliberate move to have too much run for our tools. Whether that makes us too tall, I'm not sure. Depends how we play Lever, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we still have Richmond, and they still have, Rewalt and Vickery in the forward line as their big guys, so it's not like they're just running one tall. They've still got tall guys.
Yeah, so we could go Talia, Rewalt, Hardigan, Vickery, and have Cheney play on guys like Lennon and Martin, and then have almost just play Lever loose and have him in set marking like he was last week. Because I noticed, especially in the second quarter against Port, he just seemed like he was on his own so often and just mopped up everything that came his way. So we could, in terms of marking, we could do that again. But I guess, do we want extra run or something? So I think that's... it makes it interesting.
Yeah, I still think we have enough run in the team to... I'm not sure whether carry is the right word to use for our tall forwards, but at least still manage to play them. Like you said, Lever was really good in the Port game, and I think he will probably do a similar job this week against Richmond. Interesting, who do you think guys like Brown and Laird will take, Hank?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting, as you said, like the short players that they've got in there. Like first time I've ever seen Short play, pardon the pun, but he provided a bit of zip, and he was pretty dangerous in front of goal. Rioli probably can do the same thing as well. So Laird and Brown are very reliable, but I wouldn't say that they're the quickest players in the back line. So it's going to be pretty interesting and a good test for our defence to see if they can sort of adapt to, I guess, this slightly shorter lineup. Port had Schultz, Dixon, and Westhoff last week, so the defence probably suited. Oh, sorry, that's right. Yes, yeah. But they had Howard, who is also equally the same size, and our defence probably suited that. So if they can adapt to this, and it probably shows that they can sort of match any sort of forward line, I would say. And last week was the first time I think we've ever had Hardigan, Talia, Lever, and Cheney in the same team. So they're 1 from 1 so far, but this week might be a slightly different test, I would say.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned guys like the fact that they played 3 talls and we played 3 tall defenders. When I was actually watching the game, I noticed that Lever, he didn't really man up on anyone really at any point. He was just floating around and spoiling everything, turning 1-on-1s into 2-on-1s, and Port really didn't use the isolating 3 1-on-1s in their forward line all that often, and I think that could work in our favour again this week. As we said before, Lever just roaming around marking everything could be really good. One thing I also noticed that was mentioned on the board by a Richmond poster is that both teams, but especially Richmond as well, are quite young. They've got players like McIntosh, Lloyd, Menadue, Ellis, Short and Rioli, and Lennon all under 30 games, and we've got guys like Atkins, Malira, McGovern, Hardigan, and other guys. So this will be a pretty interesting test to see how these young teams will go. And Do you think that our youth is a little bit better than Richmond's, Mr. Mystery Guest?
I don't know about that. To be honest, I don't get to see heaps of Richmond, so I couldn't tell you that. McIntosh had a really good debut game last year.
Yeah, he's been pretty solid for him.
There's not that much I can say. I mean, Malira and McGovern are pretty exciting. The Crouch brothers are still under 30 games, so they're pretty good. Atkins has shown some good things, but I don't know, I can't say that much. Short was really good last week. I think, how many games for Rioli? 2 or 3?
Well,
I think
he was drafted. Yeah. So, yeah,
this is his second game, I think.
Yeah, he didn't play last week with an injury. So just on that game last week, I actually watched the whole match against Richmond versus Collingwood, and both teams were pretty mediocre, to be honest. Richmond, they just lost the game through their own stupidity and poor defensive structures and making just the worst errors at the end. And Collingwood, on the other hand, they were also terrible. And it's just a shocking match to watch. I think we're in with a real chance that we can put in pressure, because they just absolutely fold in finals. Last year when we played them at Adelaide Oval, any big games, Richmond don't like pressure, especially towards the end. How do you see that playing out, Hank? Do you reckon we can pressure them into a win?
I think if we can play a similar game to as we did against Port, like Port were poor, but we were able to win the ball, put pressure on, and when they did have the ball, because they were under pressure, they kept on bombing it inside their 50 and weren't really kicking to advantage. So we're talking about Richmond's small forwards, and maybe they could slightly expose our tall defence. But if we can able to win the midfield battle, then any sort of forward line potential advantage that they have is pretty much null and void. And going on last week, Richmond's ball use was pretty appalling. So both teams last week, Richmond and Collingwood, pretty sloppy and, as you said, fairly average. I would think if Adelaide matched their performance, even from round one as well, that we'd probably get the chocolates. But you never know. Interstate, Richmond will want to fire back. Any away game against a team that made the finals last year, interstate, is going to be a challenge. So I wouldn't say it's a walk-up win, but I would say we're favourites, but that way.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, just looking at like the betting markets, for example, we started off not being favourites, but we've come into, I think, $1.80 at the moment, just sneaking in over the line. And yeah, as Rob mentioned in the chat, just to paraphrase a bit, Richmond were definitely pretty shit. So, so there is, of course, a slight difference in this game. We are playing away, but we're not playing at Richmond's home ground. We're not playing at the MCG. Instead, we've got them at Etihad, which is, I guess, kind of interesting for them. Mr. Mystery Guest, do you think that Etihad is a bigger advantage for the Crows or for Richmond?
I don't know. I think we actually have a pretty decent record at Etihad, although don't quote me on that. But I think they're probably partly why they went smaller, to get that extra speed. Yeah, I'm not sure if it suits one team or the other, to be honest. Probably not being at their traditional home ground does help us a little, but I'm not sure if there's a significant difference between playing at Etihad or MCG.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading some comments from Richmond people, and they seem to think that they would have preferred this game to be on the MCG because, that's where they play most of their football. And Vardy Magic in the comments has just mentioned that this game is to be known as the Angus Graham Cup, of course, referring to Richmond and Adelaide Ruckman. Not that he ever got a game for us. Yeah, it's certainly interesting to bring up him, although now I've got Loudon on the list, so not sure whether that's much of an upgrade. Anyway, Walker versus Rance. This is probably the biggest matchup in the game. One of the best key defenders against one of the best key forwards. Like I mentioned earlier, Walker absolutely towed up Rance last year. Will Walker win again? Rance said that in the recent podcast that he did with AFL Exchange that Walker is one of the hardest opponents to play on. I thought that was pretty interesting. Of course, we saw him, like I said, lose quite comprehensively to Walker last year. What do you think, Hank? Could this be the big matchup?
Oh, for sure. I think even a few people on Big Footy have bagged me for my Travis Cloak pick in the draft game on the off-season. But he didn't kick many goals, but he did seem to be able to take quite a few marks, and Rance was probably not necessarily beaten, but he didn't really win the battle last week. And you would have to think Walker wants to have a bit of a big game. Hasn't necessarily been quiet because he doesn't need to be dominating when you've got Jenkins kicking 5 and 4 goals in the last 2 weeks. But you think Taylor's probably due for a breakout game so far this year. Been not quiet, but sort of hasn't really hit the scoreboard as he would like to. So, it's pretty even. Rance is one of the better tall defenders in the competition, and obviously Tex, when he's on, is pretty much unstoppable as well. So it should be a good battle, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll be watching out for that one pretty closely. Of course, one of Richmond's key players, as I mentioned earlier, is not playing in this game, and that is Deledio, or Deledio, have you pronounced it properly. He is really a barometer for their side. It kind of is like no Deledio, no Richmond. They have a pretty shocking record without him. I think this could be one of the most important omissions for us because he has cut us up in the past. But that said, we still have guys like Dustin Martin to worry about. How do you see Dustin Martin playing against us? Of course, I think in the news just recently, his father's been deported to New Zealand or something. That's just completely random, but I read that. What do you think, Mr. Mystery Guest? How damaging could Martin be against us yet again?
Yeah, he's the big worry for me. So he hit 3 goals against, I think Brown played on him for the majority of our last game. And I think we almost dominated the last time. I think it'll be a bit closer this time though. So if he kicks 3 goals again, that could win the game for them. So we have to make sure he isn't able to have that impact. Whether we go with Brown again or we play Cheney on him, I think it'll be an interesting matchup because I think Martin is the type of player that we should be playing Cheney on, because in the past I've noticed that Martin is just too strong in the body for Brown and he'll just push off him and create too much space. Although maybe Martin might be too quick or agile for Cheney, but I think I would put Cheney on him at the start if he goes forward.
Yeah, I think it'll also be a bit of a team defensive effort there. But of course, let's not undersell our own forward line, which is firing quite well at the moment with Jenkins, Lynch, McGovern, Betts, Walker, who, even though he's been a little bit down, they've only got, as far as tall defenders are concerned, of course they've got Rance, but they've also got Chaplin and Asprey on perhaps even 4 talls in their forward line. Of course, who goes to Betts? Hank, what do you think about our forward line this week?
Oh, it's looking like it's going to be one of the best not tall forward lines, general forward lines in the competition. Even, as we've said, Walker is almost the fourth player in there at the moment. Betts, Jenkins and Lynch have probably been the main performers so far in the last 2 games, and Miller and McGovern are jumping at when required as well. They're not necessarily piling on the goals, but they're providing an option and kicking the ball inside 50 with pretty good precision. So, then you've got Charlie Cameron, Riley Knight and Troy Menzel in the SANFL as well. So, no, I think we're going to be pretty dangerous for the whole year. And outside of Rance, that defence looks a bit suspect, I would say. Troy Chaplin's been ridiculed by Port fans ever since he moved, and obviously being dropped for the opening 2 rounds is probably not a good sign for him going into this year. So, no, I think if we can get the ball in there quickly like we did last week, then we should be able to pile on a massive score, I would say, especially on the quick track at Etihad.
Yeah, hopefully we can start to see some more of that stopping the ball between the defensive 50 and the centre and sort of shooting it straight over their zone directly to unmanned players. I think if we can continue to do that, we'll be in with a real chance. Now on to a kind of a bit of a different segment that I'd just like to introduce in this podcast, and that is the Spud Watch. So in the first 2 rounds of this season, as well as a little bit typically in the past, Adelaide has kind of a small habit of getting torn up by opposition Spud players for some reason. So in round 1, we've got North's slow plotter Michael Ferrito managed to burn off a cooked Nathan Van Berlo. And of course, in round 2, just recently, SANFL superstar Aaron Young managed to kick 4 goals somehow, including 2 that would make Shane Warne certainly very proud. Which guy in the Richmond team do you think is going to cut us up this week that is probably one of their weaker players? Of course, they've got guys like Hampson, who's a pretty terrible ruckman, and Vickery, who's inferior to JJ. Mr. Mystery Guest, who do you think we need to put on Spud Watch this week?
Maybe not necessarily a Spud, but not absolute best 22. I'll say Ben Lennon.
Yeah, he came in this week, didn't he? Playing medium forward role.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not really sure why. Do you know how sometimes you've got a feeling?
Yeah.
If I was gonna put money on like one player to pop up and do something, I think it'd be him.
How about you, Hank? Who do you see cutting us up?
Oh, I think Lloyd. He's got a good leap on him. He's pretty agile as well, and I wouldn't necessarily call him a spud. He's been pretty, obviously only a goal a game he's averaged over his career, but I think in round 1 he played pretty well against Carlton and kicked one of the goals of, pretty impressive goal. It might be a contender for goal of the year this year. So, and he's an odd size. He's sort of, I'm not saying he's as good as Jake Stringer, but he's sort of that similar, 189, 190 centimetres quick, sort of medium forward, and could do some damage, I would say.
Yeah, certainly. I think I was actually going to nominate him as well as the guy that could probably cut us up. He's had 26 goals from 22 games. Not necessarily a spud like you mentioned, but just one of those lesser-known players that, we tend to not put as much time into, and they just happen to bob up and kick a small bag. So, I think we're coming to the end of our little preview of the Richmond game. Who do you think is going to win, and who will be best on ground? We'll start with you, Hank.
I'll say Crows by about 25 points, I'd say. And best on ground. Let's go with Rory. I think he's been reasonable so far, but he hasn't necessarily set the world on fire.
Sorry, which Rory?
Oh, good. That's a very good point. Yeah, we'll go with Rory Sloane, I would say.
Okay, nice. What about you, Mr. Mystery Guest?
I'll say us by 5 goals and Brodie Smith best on ground.
Yeah, I've got us winning as well by about 30 points, and I reckon best on ground Eddie Betts. Just can't see a real matchup for him. I think he could get off the chain. All right, so moving on a little bit to just a short preview of the SANFL game. We're playing Woodville West Torrens at some random oval I can't even pronounce on 2:10 p.m. on Sunday.
Morn Team Hyundai Oval.
That's where. Okay, cool. I guess that's their home ground. I'm guessing.
Also known as Woodville, I would say. Yes.
All right. Yeah. So their home ground, I guess. Of course, we're topping the ladder. At the moment, and because we don't have anyone returning from injury, and we made no changes to our AFL team, the SNFL team's pretty much unchanged. We'll still be going in with 20 plus AFL players. Just they've listed ins as Castry and Spenceley, some of our top up players, but I really can't see them getting a game. And just on the injury front, Hampton and Hunter will probably be available after the SANFL bye. So, Hank, how much do you reckon we'll beat Woodville by?
It's as a semi-SANFL supporter, as a Glenelg supporter, it's I quite like following the Crows team. I'm not sure I want to see them win the flag this year, just for the integrity of the SANFL competition, but if the Crows can go through an entire season without anyone on the injury list, then the SNFL team is going to do pretty damn well, I would say. So let's go with the Crows by about 8 goals, I would think.
What about you,
They,
Mr. Guest? How do you
the
see
Eagles.
this? Sorry?
I was just going to say the Eagles lost by 7 goals last week to South Adelaide, so they got towed up a bit last week.
Yeah, what about you, Mr. Guest? How do you see us shaping up?
Did they win their first game?
Yes, they did.
Woodville. They did. I'll say us by 6 goals.
All right, so that's a fairly decent margin. I don't think there's much more to really say. We're playing a ridiculously strong team at the moment in how many AFL players we have in there. And, I think there's just a couple of guys that probably would want to do a little bit more to push up into AFL contention. I think Cameron, he was, from all reports, pretty good in the last quarter, but not as much of a contributor throughout the rest of the game. Tom Doedee, not a particularly fantastic debut, but he'll still be working on some of his skills to the SNFL this year, I think. And also, of course, like we mentioned earlier, Riley Knight probably pretty unlucky to miss out on the team. So we've got some other matches this round to cover. I think aside from our game, which probably will be match of the round or second match of the round to this particular match, Western Bulldogs versus Hawthorn, Sunday, 3:20 p.m. at Etihad Stadium. That's, of course, Western Bulldogs' home game. I think they will go in unchanged on both teams, except Hawthorn might bring in Liam Shields, who's back from injury. This is going to be a huge game. I think Western Bulldogs have got probably a slight advantage being at Etihad Stadium, which is where they play really well. And they're playing like 7 games to start the season at Etihad, which is just ridiculous. Hank, how do you think the Western Bulldogs will take this game?
Well, I think I've picked the Bulldogs. They are looking very, very good at the moment. They're arguably as a lot of people have termed them, the sexy team in the AFL at the moment. They move the ball extremely well, quickly, and I think it's sort of almost maybe a bit of a sign of how football's changed. Maybe you see Fremantle struggling with their slow ball movement, bit older, and the Bulldogs are fresh, got speed, and sort of torched the opening 2 matches that they've won so far. So, but as much as I pick the Bulldogs, you can't question Hawthorn. Last week I picked the Eagles and they absolutely dominated. So it's going to be a great game. I think it's going to be a bit interesting to see probably 45,000 at a Bulldogs home game. They'd have to be. Surely they're going to turn up for this match. This is top of the table. Could be a legitimate stepping stone to them maybe winning the flag as well. So should be a great game.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And as you said, at Etihad, who knows how they play.
Yeah, I'm a little bit less, bullish on the Western Bulldogs. I think it's really hard to gauge at this stage how they're going, considering, Fremantle they look pretty much cooked at this point. They just have no forwards and their mids are really struggling at the moment. And St Kilda, they're probably almost a bottom 4 contender at this point. I think I've actually tipped Hawthorn, so I've gone against you, Hank. I think that people are getting a little bit too caught up in how Western Bulldogs have played against those 2 teams, and I think they could get shown up by Hawthorn, who they haven't been amazing, not as amazing as 3 flags in a row amazing, but I just think they might have a slight edge in this game over the Bulldogs. What do you see happening, Mr. Guest?
Yeah, I tipped against Hawthorn last week, and that didn't. West Coast didn't go very well. It just seems, despite what the Bulldogs have shown so far, it's too hard to tip against Hawthorn. Every year they're talked up about possibly sliding a little bit, and they're still. I mean, they dominated West Coast when they still had a lot of their best 22 injured. So I can't. I don't know. It's hard. I think it being at Etihad obviously gives the Bulldogs an advantage, but I just can't tip against Hawthorn.
Yeah,
it's too many times going against them, and they've just shown up and just done what they do. So
yeah, like you, I tipped West Coast last week, and I think that's a mistake. Although, even though I probably shouldn't be just changing based on my failure last week, I still think Hawthorn will probably take that one out. And we've also got I guess, two derbies that are kind of interesting to watch on Saturday straight after our game. So there's Sydney versus GWS on Saturday at 4:35 p.m. and West Coast versus Freo on Saturday as well at 5:40 p.m. Australian Western Standard Time. So that will be the night game for Adelaide and Victoria. I think these are probably two of the most interesting games that aren't our game. A lot of the other games not too exciting as far as matchups go, but derbies are always kind of interesting. Hank, Sydney versus GWS. Who takes this one out?
I've picked Sydney, but in the pre-season, GWS towed them up pretty comfortably. And as you were saying about the Bulldogs, they've looked impressive, but they played Fremantle, who looked slow, and they played St Kilda last week, who might be bottom four. And you could argue that Sydney's had the same sort of story so far. They played a terrible Collingwood in round one, and then they played Carlton, who are likely wooden spooners this year last week. So it's hard to know whether their form is actually impressive or not. And GWS obviously got the chocolates again, a pretty improved Geelong side. So it should be a very interesting game. I think this might be the making of the GWS team here. They beat them last year, I think. Was it last year or the year before? So they've beaten them once, but this might be the sort of first signs that they're really stepping towards the finals, I would say. So while I'm picking Sydney, I would not be surprised at all if GWS won at the SCG as well. So it's a Swans home game there.
Yeah, I agree. I think this will probably be a close one. I think the main difference for me would be Sydney's got Franklin in the forward line and he's returned to form big time over the last couple of weeks, whereas GWS is missing Jeremy Cameron through suspension, and Patton wasn't all that impressive last week. So I'm tipping Sydney as well. How about you, Mr. Guest?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that's Sydney's advantage is their forward line. But I just think that the Giants are a more balanced side. So I just across the ground, I guess, without Cameron, they definitely look a lot weaker. But I think even across the midfield and in defence, they just are more balanced compared to Sydney. So I think that'll give them an edge.
Yeah, so who you end up tipping there? Pretty tough one.
The Giants.
Ooh, okay. Well, hopefully Sydney wins so I can get my tip. West Coast versus Freo. This is, of course, the other main derby, and I think that what was interesting during the week was Ross Lyon basically came out and said that their stoppages weren't really working for them. They made some tweaks over the off-season, and basically they haven't really been executing them all that well. But even if they've managed to fix that up, I think West Coast will absolutely destroy them at home. What do you think, Mr. Guest?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. So they're both coming off pretty disappointing games from last week. So you'd think both would be pretty fired up to perform well. But if I doubt how much... I mean, they may improve their stoppage work if they go back to a previous style, I guess. But they're looking pretty tired at the moment. Still no forward line, but it seems to have gone backwards. So can't see Fremantle winning.
How about you, Hank?
Yeah, I picked West Coast as well. It's going to be, as you said, bit of background noise there.
Yeah, Mr. Guy's got some people yelling in the background or something. Don't know what's happening there, but what were you saying, Hank?
Yeah, I picked West Coast. I think obviously, as you said, both teams are coming off a pretty disappointing performance, but I think West Coast at home are a fairly different team to the one they play when they play at the MCG. So they've got talent across the board, and Freo are looking down and out at the moment. Obviously, both teams need a rebound, but you would have thought Fremantle would want to respond after losing to the Bulldogs, and they lost to the Gold Coast at home. So I don't think they've got the ability to rebound now, I would say. I think they might be maybe a big slider this year.
Yeah,
so
I agree.
Eagles at home.
I think everyone's tipping West Coast. I think that's a pretty straightforward one. And just a final game I want to sneak in here just a little bit. It's probably not going to be the most exciting game that we've ever seen, but Essendon versus Port Adelaide on Friday night. I think not from the game perspective, really, but from a punting perspective, I think there's a lot of good value to be had in this match. I think the line, when I was looking just earlier, is still at, 47 or 48 points in favour of, Port Adelaide winning, but Port Adelaide's got a lot of players out at the moment. They've just, had to admit Carlisle and Wingard due to injuries. They're bringing back guys like Stewart, Amon and Darcy Byrne-Jones at the expense of Howard. And they've got other guys out too, like I mentioned earlier, like Hartlett and those guys. I think Essendon could be in with a real chance to make it underneath that line and get a lot closer than a 50-point blowout in favour of Port Adelaide. How do you see it playing out tomorrow, Hank?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I had no idea on those odds. I just looked at on my phone here, and Essendon are $6.50 to get the win. So that line of 40-odd points is probably pretty accurate. And, obviously there's a lot of everyone knows about Essendon's outs due to the suspensions. But when you look at Port's outs, and I mean, you could argue that their outs are just as strong as Essendon's outs. So Schultz, White, Hartlett, they lost Wingard this week, and Boak's pretty underdone. So gee whiz. I mean, I think I'll pick Port only because it's at home. But if this was being played in Melbourne, I think I'd almost pick Essendon. So you might cost me $10 because I might put that on Sportsbet, I'd say. You've just talked me into it.
Yeah, I got on the line at $48. 48 points. I know some people on the board got it even better at like 50 plus on the line. I think they're not going to. Yeah, Port Adelaide's not going to beat them by 50. I think that's pretty unreasonable.
The line's 45.5 points at the moment.
Yeah, so I think, that's presents some pretty interesting value there. Mr. Misgrace, how do you see this game playing out?
There was some talk on the board that with Port's performances so far, that they might drop this one, but it's almost too good to be true, I think.
Yeah.
Unless, I think what might happen, it might be a bit similar to the St Kilda game, where Port, assuming, unless they really turn up and play hard, I think it'll be a bit like round one, where they struggle for a little bit and just stay only a little bit ahead of Essendon and then blow them away in the last quarter.
Yeah, I could equally see that happen. I think I posted on the betting board on Big Footy that there's also an interesting thing that you can pick up where if Essendon's leading at any quarter at any point, you can get that for $2.90. And I think, like you said, if Essendon ends up playing a bit like St Kilda in the first game against Port Adelaide, that St Kilda was leading for a couple of those quarter changes, that could also present some good value. Not that I'd bet responsibly and all that sort of stuff, but I think this could be one of those matches where you could find some real gems amongst the markets there. All right, so I think that wraps us up for the Crowcast preview for round 3 against Richmond. Hope everyone listening in live enjoyed it, and of course you can catch us again live next week at 7:30 p.m. Adelaide time, and of course there's replays as well available on Spreaker. And as I just found out, we are now on iTunes as well, so if you prefer getting your podcast through iTunes, you can now get us through there. And I recommend an app like Pocket Casts if you've got Android or iOS. It's a really great podcasting app there, and we're of course available there too. Social feeds, you can follow us on Twitter at BF Crowcast, on Facebook as well, BF Crowcast, and we'll all be on the bigfooty.com boards in the Adelaide board quite often, so you can all come and chat to us there if you're not familiar with Big Footy, but I imagine a lot of people listening to this podcast are. So thanks everyone for watching, and we'll be back next week.
See you later.